hold on, before you click away. This is not your average villain video. You may have already watched a bunch of villain videos on how to create motivations for your villain or how to make your party empathize with them. However, this video is something else because you can't figure out what exactly your villain is. You don't need tips, you need inspiration. Hello Acolytes! Welcome to the Cleric Corner. My name is Riker, and here we talk about all things Dungeons & Dragons, tapping into our higher powers to create worlds more unique and stories more impactful. So to premise this, when we usually go to make our villains, there are subclasses or archetypes that we're generally drawn the most to. You know, subclasses like these that have a darker edge to them. However, what if we look at some other subclasses that we may not think immediately villain and see what other concepts we can come up with? Or at least to help you brainstorm and inspire your next BBEG to be a unique and impactful one for your players. A big, beautiful, evocative gift for your table. To take a look at these villain concepts, we're going to take one subclass from each official class in D&D, and as this channel does, subvert them to be a little bit more villainous. But these can also be your anti-heroes, rivals, and other antagonists. Drag and drop these into your own campaigns, or just use this method as inspiration to create on your own. But starting in alphabetical order, let's look at the Alchemist Artificer, which you may consider the healer of the Artificer subclasses, one that creates elixirs and helps boon their friends. But this Artificer is ambitious and believes that science will ultimately render the gods irrelevant, because as we learn to heal ourselves, we lose the need for their divine hand. Perhaps this character even comes from religious trauma, or perhaps their need to replace the gods comes from a lack of material components, you know, things like diamonds that are scarce or non-existent in this world. This then comes from a desperation in a world that is hard to access the gods' power. With their mixtures, they're trying to create an elixir of life or a fountain of youth. However, these prototype elixirs have caused detrimental effects on the populace, and they won't stop. With this endeavor, they even might have developed a cult with the promise of eternal life to their followers. The players must intervene before the search to eternal life becomes mass hysteria or death. Next, for the Barbarian, we look at the Beast subclass. Barbarians in and of themselves are seldom used for big BBEGs in my opinion, or at least from what I've seen, just because you can throw one Force Cage spell on one and render it useless. However, we can look at a few that maybe have bonded together, and for this example, I want to take one of our first villains that we remember from our first games of D&D. And of course, this isn't everyone, but in a lot of first campaigns, you find yourself finding and destroying a goblin cave. But what if goblins stopped being just your first encounter to every D&D game, but was the actual BBG in the higher levels as well? A mass goblin society that now wants revenge on your players from that first session. Because these goblins have grown tired of the progressive force of elves, dwarves, and humans. This forces them to forge allies with trolls, bugbears, and ogres. This also causes them to seek other power to stop the incursions of other adventurers invading their caves, just like they owned the place, possibly driving into things like lycanthropy or gathering monster parts to help them in their fight. And at the head of this organized chaos, a goblin king, a warlord that continues to send waves of green to destroy cities unless your adventurers have something to say about it. But another class that I don't see a lot at tables used as villains is the Bard. In this case, we'll look at the Glamour Bard, one that focuses on a Fey transformation to enthrall their enemies. However, the Fey part is just flavor text, and for this villain, their transformation into something otherworldly is all part of their scheme. They could be on their path to embrace some high form of vampirism, or be infected by a mind flayer tadpole and be slowly going through seramorphosis. Wow, I'm actually surprised that I got seramorphosis right the first time. I did it again. I do notice that I talk about mind flayers a lot on this channel, but I do think they're pretty cool. Or they could be on their way to godhood with a divine transformation. Their enthrallment powers is to gain followers, to gain illithid slaves, or vampiric thralls. Speaking of thralls, abelisks and krakens also have those. Perhaps this enthralling performance is them out on the street preaching or handing out propaganda. Imagine your players walking down the street and overhearing this sermon and then all of a sudden having to roll saving throws. The players eventually realizing that they must stop them before their transformation reaches its zenith. Ah yes, and now the Cleric. And one subclass that I've never actually had at the table, but now looking at the Forge Cleric, I think I need to. A subclass usually preserved for blacksmiths, This villain is driven by pride, a desire to be remembered and respected by the gods. And to do so, they set out on an adventure to create the most powerful weapon or armor as a tribute to the gods. However, to do so, they need specific materials, which causes them to steal a magic gem from a desert city, taking away their ability to yield crops. And without it, they are plunged into famine. Next, they have to collect a soul of a sphinx, causing them to kill a sphinx leader of another city. And then finally, a special piece of metal that holds open a portal to the plane of Earth. Without the material, the portal closes, and now all trade to that plane ceases. To bring it even further, characters realize that later down the road, they are actually using this weapon to be a vessel for some sort of dark god or demon prince. There is worry that if successful, it could also fall into the wrong hands, and many interested parties could be chasing it down, rivaling yours. You'll need to stop the cleric because the next owner of this weapon could be worse. But now let's look at the druid, and honestly a subclass that may be considered an anti-druid already, the Wildfire subclass. Sure, you can make a villain that causes destruction to forests, but I think we're gonna go a step further. To this point, you may know already that druids are born in the material plane through the magic of nature within it. But what do druids look like who are the embodiment of nature on different planes of existence? What would a druid look like that lived their entire life in the Shadowfell? Or one that was born on Mechanus? For the Wildfire druid, we're going to reflavor it to be a druid that came from either the Nine Hells or the Abyss. A tiefling that, by orders of the devils higher up or simply just being an agent of chaos, they are slowly terraforming the material plane to be a little closer to resemble hell. Millions of acres, now an open portal where these creatures from the lower planes now exist and live. This terraformer even having a wildfire imp at their side as a companion. What could even be more frightening is that this manipulation and terraforming could be mindless. The path that this spirit walks is instinctual, and they're unaware that they're on the wrong plane. A long-lost spirit wandering the plane and trying to find their home that existed when they're alive, but now doesn't exist as they've been spending decades climbing the devil hierarchy. The adventurers must drag them back to their plane of existence or risk the material plane to become the 10th layer of hell. But it's important to realize that your BBEG doesn't have to have world-ending events to still be a force to be reckoned with, or to be satisfying when you eventually defeat them. But to talk on this, I'll actually turn the time over to a friend of the channel, Eric from Geek Pantheon. Take it away, Eric.
What is up, Riker? Thank you so much. I am Eric from the Geek Pantheon here, and I wanted to talk to you all about creating and role-playing villains in a compelling way. So first off, your villains should be individuals that are satisfying to defeat. I'm talking about capital V villains, the big bad evils of your campaign. Craft them in a way to where the party is going to be satisfied when they finally get to bring that villain low. Morally gray villains, rivals, antagonists are great for adventures, but you don't want to hang your campaign on something that's not going to be satisfying for the party. And when it comes to role-playing them, don't underestimate mundane actions and their ability to have an impact on the players. Destroying a city is going to be this horrifying action that the player characters will acknowledge is just this horrible thing. But if the villain kills a friend or a family member, it's much smaller, more personal, it's going to have a much bigger impact. And it can even go down to just a slight if the villain steals something from the party that they care about, or releases a pet into the wild. That's going to drive the party crazy, and they're going to want to hunt down that villain. So don't underestimate mundane actions and the impact they can have for your villain. Anyway, thank you, Riker, for the chance to talk to everybody, and I will throw it back to you.
Thanks, Eric. We actually did this villain collaboration thing together, so if you want to see the rest of his video on the subject, go and check out his channel linked below. He also has incredible deep dives into other character classes, as well as D&D tips for all elements of play. All with a voice that's so easy on the ears, it should be a crime. But now let's continue on our next class, the Fighter, and a fun subclass that goes hand in hand with our concept, the Cavalier. Now, normally the adventurers are the ones that pursue an aloof villain, but in this case, this villain is chasing them. A mysterious stranger on a horse that always seems to be looking at the party from a very far off. Very ominous when the party sees it, but they never know why. But then, after they study their target for long enough, they strike. And you see an assortment of body parts and trophies that hang off the saddle of their mount. They are a creature in search of a challenge, and the party has caught their interest. A victory will win them the self-gratification that they seek before moving on to their next unlucky victim. However, they do know when they're outmatched, so when the party gets advantage of them, they take their mount and run away. And perhaps when the party encounters them again and again throughout the campaign, their mounts become stronger and stronger, possibly switching it out for a bullet and then a gorgon, and then a dragon. Or as they collect their mounts, it becomes an ever-expanding herd of monsters with one leader. This is also a good opportunity for you to tie this villain into a player's backstory, as you always should. Asking yourself if somebody sent this Cavalier to get them. Who would want them dead and for what reason? The players must be resourceful to keep them from escaping and question their intent. Next we have a fan favorite, he said sarcastically, the monk. Guys, but seriously? Like, we should have more monk villains. You know how terrifying it is for a villain to walk on water and walk on walls and then go ahead and stun your party's biggest spellcaster? So for this subclass, we're going to look at the Long Death Monk. And I actually considered a rum-addicted pirate crew of drunken master monks, but I like this idea a little bit better, so you get that one for free. But instead of the Zen archetype that you may be familiar with monks, this one is driven by insecurity and fear. If you've seen my Better Monks video in my Better Class series, you may know what's coming, because this monk is harboring an incredible plague. They are a vessel for a pandemic-sized disease that, if released, will cause genocide. The monk is even mutated and corrupted by this disease, maddened as their perception of reality is altered by this sickness, and even having schizophrenia. They may not even attack the party out of hate, but of self-preservation, as the party may realize that the only way to stop this disease from getting out is to kill its holder. They attack with punches that channel this disease and cause a long and painful death. There may be even other monks that see this disease as a good thing and come to aid in this fight. However, continuing to let this monk roam free is a ticking time bomb, and the fate of the world is up to you. Now up next we have the Redemption Paladin, and an easy go-to villain I think would be the Oathbreaker Paladin, but let's instead look at the goodest boy, the Redemption Paladin. This villain actually does start as an ally, a Prince Charming of a local kingdom. They have ambitions to bring peace and redemption to an otherwise chaotic world. They talk of change and better days to come and even come close to the party. They seem naive but good intentioned, but yet that's where it turns south. In pursuing the redemption of the realm, it may require a few sacrifices, and the party finds most of the noble family killed by some unknown hand. Through blaming and misdirection, this Prince Charming now becomes king and immediately starts war with all the neighboring countries, seeing these countries as corrupt, and the only way to wash their country's hands of it is to rid themselves of the stain. As each kingdom falls, the prince feels more glorified and justified in his purpose. But the party eventually catches on to their antics because many innocents are caught in the crossfire, and now must risk prison or even beheading, as questioning the king is treason. But wait too long and there might just be one kingdom left. But as an added tip and note, when thinking of villains with paladins, instead of looking at oaths like something that they embody, think of it as something that they fear desperately not to have. But next we move on to another great class, the Ranger. Looking at the Horizon Walker subclass, we find an archetype that is good at traveling between planes. What's amazing in D&D is we have recent additions like Dream of the Blue Veil spell, or the Spelljammer book that is supposed to come out later this year, creating unique opportunities to find a multiplanar or multiversal villain. Because this villain has come from an alternate reality of this one and is driven by purpose and duty for the greater good. They have come from this version of the world that is plunged into destruction and chaos, and all due to the single moment in history they have vowed to themselves that they would not let this happen on any other world. And so they traveled the multiverse. And unfortunately, this process to stop this one event from happening includes killing a king, as well as possibly a genocide of a nation and unleashing a chained god. The question comes up, is that worth it for the greater good? The players may not even know their intentions, and even if it happened in this reality of their world, it doesn't necessarily mean that it'll happen in this one. But even with all of these questions, the villain knows exactly who the party is. Worlds upon worlds where they killed the party, and they know their secrets and won't hesitate to do it again. The party must try to do something extremely out of character to outsmart them, and cross their finger that they didn't try this in a different reality. And now one of the edgiest of edgelords, the Rogue. A popular pick for villains as we have thieves guilds, bounty hunters, and assassins. But let's take a peek at the Inquisitive Rogue, and in fact, let's make them a cripple too. A victimized rogue that wonders, why me and not everyone else? They are driven by jealousy, emotional pain, and revenge. Revenge on the world that is unkind to them and hurt them, and they want the world to feel what they felt. They just want to be understood, and in order to do that, they find ways to exploit weaknesses in government like trade, other relations, and economy. They are also skilled enough to find what hurts the most with their party and targets what they love the most. The party will understand the villain's pain if they have anything to say about it. Interesting for a villain who's just sets out to be understood, but quickly becomes personal with the party. As an added note for this one too, Inquisitive Rogue actually makes good druid killers in later levels, so perhaps the pain that they feel resolves somewhat around them. But here we have the Sorcerer class next. And diving into what you could consider the goody two-shoes class of the Divine Soul, we actually find a soul that's a little more corrupt. And of course, being a sorcerer, they're not tied to any deity, so they get to use their magic of their own free will. And through some unknown reason, this villain is going around and resurrecting other villains that your party is already taken care of, raising dead from prison graveyards or other crypts, even villains that your party hasn't even seen yet. But dark warlords, evil druids, and cult members now walk the earth again to exact their revenge on the party, or continue on with their plans that they had previously before you killed them. But the question is, why is this Divine Soul Sorcerer resurrecting all of these people? Perhaps they're a supporter of them, or perhaps they want to see the party dead, but don't want to do it themselves. Or perhaps it's just a distraction in order for them to heal their father, the broken tyrannical avatar of war. They have heard of your party's antics and have no desire to go toe-to-toe with you. So instead, they keep you busy with other villains while they pursue their own intent. This pursuit could also be undermining a different part of player backstory, or one unique to themselves that the party has yet to figure out. But they better catch on quick and not get too distracted, because they have a choice between two greater evils. Next, we have another one of the edgiest subclasses, the Warlock, one that is often used in D&D villains. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, because in my experience, they're a very fun and evocative class to play with. But with the Genie Warlock, let's see if we can shake things up just a little bit more. Now, it's sometimes fun to include in your villain personalities one of the 7 deadly sins: pride, envy, lust, etc. However, one of them that I think is seldom used: slothfulness. So imagine with me a Genie Warlock aristocrat that wants nothing but to do nothing. Their greatest desire is to be as slothful as they can, get everything given to them, and not have to work. So, you know, a very relatable villain. But they didn't make their pact for power, no, they made it to be lazy. And now with their pact, they can make wishes to wish away inconveniences, but unfortunately at the detriment to the society around them. Wishing for all the food that they could eat unfortunately makes food disappear in the food storages of the local villages. Wishing for luxuries and an entertainment unfortunately pulls focus away from the military and crime rates skyrocket. The greatest evil in this case is not a villain making an action, but rather an inaction. And they have been allowed to live in this luxury while others don't, because they promise to a select few the wishes that they get to enjoy. And they reward those who weigh on them hand and foot. And the players may also be tempted with a wish when they decide to confront this big bad couch potato. And now we move to the Wizards, another major one that's picked in the industry of villains, solely because of their spell selection and their ability to literally warp reality. But as we look at the Scribes Wizard, we look at one that's driven by something other than power. With this subclass comes an Awakened Spellbook, which manifests a spectral consciousness that helps aid the wizard. This wizard is not necessarily evil, however, but the spirits trapped within the book that they read from are. Their whispers tempt and manipulate this wizard to fulfill their unfinished business. This villain is a pawn, though still very much capable and intelligent. They are the hand and the wand of this spectral legion, coming to the ancient spirit's defense as they are confronted, convinced that they are doing the right thing. Judging by what the players do, however, this wizard might have doubts that are able to be exploited. But be careful not to separate the book from its owner, however, because it might kill the owner and release all of these souls from their paper prison. But I hope that you can see that there is so much inspiration that you can take from different subclasses in D&D, especially with opening up your mind to different archetypical concepts, making it fun and easy to create villains that are an impactful experience for your players, and creating a story that is truly unique. And if you have other unique ideas for villains, or have even played some of these ideas before, please let me know in the comments below. If you want more inspiration for your dragon villains or dragon encounters, click on this video next. But in the meantime, go out there and spread the good word of D&D and make the world a better place, both on and off your tables. See you in the next one.